The air in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria tasted of old money and vintage champagne, a suffocating blend of privilege that I had spent the last 5 years learning to weaponize. I stood near the ornate ice sculpture, adjusting the perfectly tailored cuffs of my Tom Ford suit. To the casual observer, I was Ethan Hayes, a young, somewhat nervous single father who had miraculously scored an invitation to Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala. But beneath the tailored silk and the carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed innocence, my pulse was steady, ticking like a metronome counting down to 0. I was a predator wearing sheep's clothing, and tonight, I was hunting the apex alpha of Wall Street. "Daddy, my feet hurt," a small voice grumbled. I looked down. Leo was tugging at his miniature velvet bow tie, his mismatched eyes, one striking hazel, the other a chilling silver, glaring at me with an annoyance that was a carbon copy of his other father. "I know, buddy. Just a few more minutes," I whispered, kneeling to smooth his dark, messy curls. I allowed a trace of distress to leak into my scent, just enough distressed omega pheromones, crushed lavender and sharp citrus, to subtly alert the alphas in the room that I was vulnerable. It was a calculated risk. I needed the bait to be irresistible. I checked my watch, 8:14 p.m. Right on schedule. Harrison Kincaid never arrived early. He believed punctuality was for the working class. True power made people wait. "Leo," I said, my voice barely above a breath. "Do you see that big table with the chocolate fountain?" Leo's eyes lit up, the discomfort of his formal shoes instantly forgotten. "Yeah. I need you to walk over there, get a strawberry, and then stand right by the big pillar next to it. Don't talk to anyone. If a scary man in a black suit tries to talk to you, just look at him. Remember our game." "The staring contest game," Leo nodded solemnly. "Exactly, now go." I watched my 5-year-old son weave through the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. My chest tightened with genuine anxiety for a fraction of a second, but I brutally forced it down. This was the only way. For 5 years, I had plotted, coded trading bots in dimly lit apartments, and analyzed every weakness of the Kincaid empire. But to destroy the king, you had to get inside the castle. And Harrison Kincaid's castle had only one vulnerability: his bloodline. A sudden hush fell over the room near the entrance. The string quartet seemed to falter for half a beat. The atmospheric pressure shifted, growing heavy, almost suffocating. The scent of spiced sandalwood and ozone crashed through the ballroom like a tidal wave. Harrison Kincaid had arrived. Even across the crowded room, he was devastating, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of lethal authority that made the city's billionaires instinctively step aside. He was flanked by his usual security detail, looking utterly bored as sycophants tried to catch his eye. I held my breath. 3, 2, 1. Harrison stopped walking. His head snapped up. Even from this distance, I saw his chest expand as he inhaled sharply. The predatory instincts of an alpha, specifically a Kincaid alpha, were practically mythological. He had caught the scent, not mine but Leo's. A scent that carried his own genetic signature, undeniable and demanding. Harrison's gaze swept the room with terrifying speed and locked instantly on the chocolate fountain. There, holding a chocolate-covered strawberry, stood Leo, staring right back at him with the exact same silver hazel eyes. The silence that followed was louder than an explosion. I saw Harrison freeze. I saw the absolute shock shatter his mask of indifference. Then, the shock morphed into something far more dangerous: raw, unadulterated possessiveness. He began walking toward Leo, his strides long and aggressive. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. This was my cue. I pushed through the crowd, deliberately stumbling slightly, letting the panic I had practiced 100 times take over my features. "Leo. Leo," I cried out, my voice cracking perfectly. I reached my son just seconds before Harrison did. I dropped to my knees, pulling Leo into a desperate, trembling hug. "I told you not to wander off," I gasped, burying my face in his neck, ensuring that my distressed omega scent was now overpowering. "Are you his mother?" The voice was a low, vibrating growl that settled deep in my bones. It was the voice that had haunted my nightmares and fueled my revenge for 5 years. I slowly looked up, widening my eyes, trembling perfectly. Harrison was looming over me, up close. The resemblance between him and Leo was a physical blow. The sharp jawline, the intense, brooding stare. "I am his father," I said, my voice barely a whisper, clutching Leo tighter as if trying to shield him. "Please excuse us. He just got lost." I tried to stand up, to play the part of the terrified Omega fleeing from the terrifying Alpha. But Harrison moved faster. His large hand clamped down on my wrist. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was an absolute restraint. The touch sent a jolt of electricity up my arm, a biological reaction I hated myself for still having. "You are not going anywhere," Harrison stated. It wasn't a threat, it was a law of physics. His eyes darted from my face to Leo's, his pupils blown wide, consuming the iris. "He has my eyes." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice shaking. "Let me go." "Clear the room," Harrison barked without looking away from me. His security detail moved instantly, bodily pushing billionaires and socialites away, creating an isolated perimeter around us. The murmurs of scandalized shock began to ripple through the ballroom. "He is mine," Harrison whispered, crouching down until he was eye level with me. The scent of his sandalwood pheromones was intoxicating, designed to command obedience. "And you hid him from me." "We need to leave," I pleaded, acting on the verge of tears. Harrison didn't argue. He simply reached out and scooped Leo out of my arms with surprising gentleness. Leo, true to his instructions, just stared at the man unbothered. Then, Harrison grabbed my arm again, hauling me to my feet. "We are leaving," Harrison announced to the room at large, "my car now." 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the back of a heavily armored Maybach, speeding down Fifth Avenue. The tinted windows shut out the flashing lights of Manhattan. Harrison sat beside me, Leo asleep on his lap, exhausted by the sugar and the tension. Harrison was on his phone, barking orders to his security chief to lock down the press and erase any photos taken at the gala. He was furious, territorial, and completely blind to the reality of the situation. I turned my head to look out the window, resting my cheek against the cool glass. In the reflection, I saw Harrison staring at the sleeping boy with a hunger that bordered on madness. He thought he had caught me. He thought he was the hunter dragging his stolen prey back to his lair. Under the cover of the darkness, my lips curved into a cold, satisfied smile. The bait was taken. Now, the real game begins. The ride to the Upper East Side was a masterclass in suffocating silence. When the private elevator doors opened into Harrison's penthouse, I wasn't stepping into a home. I was stepping into a gilded cage. It was a sprawling expanse of cold marble, dark leather, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered the glittering expanse of Manhattan on a silver platter. It smelled inherently of him, a potent, intoxicating blend of cedarwood, expensive scotch, and the undeniable ozone of an alpha in his prime. Harrison immediately went into lockdown mode. He barked orders to a stoic head of security, establishing a perimeter, no press, no unauthorized visitors, especially no one bearing the last name Kincaid. "You and Leo will take the master suite," Harrison announced, loosening his tie with a careless grace that made my traitorous pulse flutter. "I will take the guest room. The staff will get whatever the boy needs." "Thank you," I murmured, keeping my eyes downcast, playing the overwhelmed, grateful Omega. But the moment I locked the bathroom door of the master suite, the facade vanished. I leaned over the marble sink, staring at my reflection. My pupils were slightly dilated, my skin flushed. The concentration of Harrison's pheromones in this apartment was weaponized. It was a biological siege designed to make an Omega submit, to crave the safety and warmth of the Alpha's bite. My hands shook as I opened my toiletry bag and pulled out a nondescript amber bottle. I dry swallowed 2 heavy, military-grade suppressant pills. The chemical bitterness coated the back of my throat, a harsh reminder of reality. I needed my mind sharp. I couldn't afford to be dragged into the haze of an induced preheat. At 2:00 a.m., the penthouse was dead silent. I slipped out of bed, leaving a deeply slumbering Leo tangled in silk sheets. I opened my encrypted laptop on the glass coffee table in the living room. The glow of the screen illuminated my face as my fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the real reason I needed to be inside Harrison's fortress. His home network had direct, unmonitored clearance to Kincaid Global's private servers. I began deploying the high-frequency trading bots I had spent years coding. They were digital parasites, designed to quietly infiltrate the market and prepare for a massive, coordinated short-selling of Kincaid core assets. Line by line, I wove the digital noose. I was so engrossed in the code that I almost didn't hear the footsteps. I snapped the laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribs, but it was just one of the night guards passing by the hallway. I let out a shaky breath. It was too close. The real danger, however, didn't come from the security team. It came from my own blood. The next morning, the kitchen was bathed in golden sunlight. Harrison stood by the espresso machine, looking devastatingly domestic in a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He was awkwardly but earnestly trying to cut a waffle for Leo. "So, you like spaceships?" Harrison asked, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. "Yeah," Leo swung his legs, kicking the island stool. but I like computers better. Daddy is super fast at computers. I froze, my coffee cup halting halfway to my lips. Leo shoved a piece of syrup-soaked waffle into his mouth and looked at Harrison with bright, innocent eyes. He is like a ninja. Why do you make typing sounds in the dark every night, Daddy? Are you playing video games without me? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Harrison paused, the knife resting against the china plate. He turned his head slowly, his piercing silver eyes locking onto mine. The predator was suddenly awake. Is that so? Harrison asked, his voice smooth, dangerously low. Typing in the dark, Ethan. I felt a bead of cold sweat slide down my spine. Damn it, Leo. I forced a breathless, slightly embarrassed laugh, clutching my coffee mug. Oh, sweetheart, I told you. Daddy has insomnia. I was trying to finish some freelance architectural drafting. The deadlines are tight, and I couldn't sleep. I looked up at Harrison, widening my eyes slightly, letting a sliver of vulnerability leak into my scent. It is hard to sleep in a new place. Harrison stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. His gaze stripped me down to the bone, then slowly, the tension bled out of his posture. If you need money, Ethan, you don't need to work yourself to death in the middle of the night. You have me now. I like to earn my own keep. I deflected softly. The crisis was averted, but the margin for error was shrinking rapidly. That evening, I stood by the mahogany desk in the study. The final piece of the puzzle, a microscopic USB drive containing a localized malware payload, was concealed in my sweaty palm. I just needed 3 seconds to plug it into Harrison's personal desktop. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly. Suddenly, the heavy oak door clicked shut. I stiffened. Before I could turn, a large, warm chest pressed against my back. The scent of cedar wood and impending thunder wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Harrison's arms came around my waist, pulling me flush against him. I gasped, instinctively hiding the USB drive in the curl of my fist. Harrison buried his face in the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland. I felt his chest expand as he took a deep, lingering inhale. But instead of relaxing, his body went rigid. You are hiding something, Harrison murmured, his lips brushing against my pulse point. His voice was a dark, vibrating purr that sent a shiver straight to my core. I don't know what you mean, I whispered, my voice betraying me with a slight tremor. Your scent, he growled softly, his hand sliding up to grip my hip possessively. It is suffocated. You are taking military-grade suppressants. They smell like ash and chemicals, Ethan. What are you so afraid of feeling? He was too perceptive. He was going to turn me around. He was going to see my clenched fist. He was going to see the computer. Panic and adrenaline collided in my veins. There was only one way to shut down an Alpha's logic center. I spun around in his arms, dropping the USB drive onto the thick carpet where he couldn't see it. Before he could utter another word, I grabbed the lapels of his shirt, pulled him down, and crushed my lips against his. Harrison froze for a microsecond in pure shock, then with a low feral groan, his hands tangled in my hair, and he kissed me back with a hunger that threatened to consume us both. I closed my eyes, letting the fire take over, praying the kiss would buy me the time I needed to burn his empire to the ground. The kiss from the night before was a tactical maneuver, a desperate deployment of biological warfare to distract the enemy. But as the sleek Kincaid Global helicopter touched down on the private helipad of their Wall Street headquarters the next morning, I could still taste the phantom burn of Harrison's lips on mine. It was a terrifying realization. I was supposed to be playing a role, but my body was forgetting the script. Stepping off the helipad, the wind whipped at my tailored trench coat. Harrison placed a heavy, possessive hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the private elevator. To the dozens of executives and security personnel we passed, I was the newly discovered Omega, the vulnerable mother of the Kincaid, clinging to the Alpha for protection. I kept my gaze demurely lowered, letting the scent of crushed lavender mask the ice-cold calculation in my veins. My father wants to meet the man who kept his grandson hidden for 5 years. Harrison murmured as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing us in a mahogany and brass cage. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of its usual warmth. He is in a foul mood. Stay close to me, Ethan. Do not let him intimidate you. I am just an architect, Harrison, I replied smoothly, widening my eyes. What could I possibly say to Richard Kincaid? Harrison looked down at me, his silver eyes flashing with an unreadable emotion. More than you let on, I imagine. The doors chimed open at the 80th floor, the executive suite. It was a monument to corporate ruthlessness. We were immediately ushered into Richard Kincaid's office, a cavernous room reeking of aged tobacco leather, and the oppressive, stagnant pheromones of an aging alpha desperate to hold onto his crown. Richard Kincaid sat behind a desk the size of a small boat. He didn't stand when we entered. His sharp, hawk-like eyes dissected me instantly, searching for weakness. "So, the runaway Omega," Richard sneered, his voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "You have a pretty face, I will give you that. But a pretty face doesn't justify a 5-year theft of Kincaid blood." "I did what I thought was best for Leo," I said softly, stepping slightly behind Harrison, playing the part of the intimidated prey. "Father," Harrison growled, a warning vibration rattling in his chest. "Watch your tone. He is my partner." "He is a liability," Richard countered, standing up and walking toward the antique liquor cabinet across the room. "And I don't tolerate liabilities in my empire." As Richard turned his back to pour a drink, and Harrison stepped forward to intercept him, my moment arrived. I had exactly 4 seconds. I leaned heavily against the edge of Richard's massive desk, feigning a sudden dizzy spell from the suffocating alpha pheromones. My hand slipped beneath the heavy oak rim. Between my index and middle finger was a microfrequency emitter, a flat, coin-sized device I had engineered myself. I pressed it firmly against the underside of the wood, the adhesive locking it in place. It was utterly silent, but over the next few weeks, it would emit a localized, ultra-high-frequency microwave hum. It was entirely undetectable to the human ear, but it would wreak havoc on Richard's neurological system. It would cause insomnia, paranoia, and severe cognitive fatigue. To destroy a king, you first had to make him lose his mind. I pulled my hand back just as Richard turned around. I swayed slightly, and Harrison was instantly at my side, his arm wrapping around my waist like a steel band. "The air is too thin in here for him," Harrison stated coldly, glaring at his father. "We are leaving." We retreated to Harrison's private office 2 floors down. It was a stark contrast to his father's modern, glass-walled, and bathed in natural light. Harrison settled me onto a plush sofa before walking over to his multi-monitor trading terminal. He loosened his tie, the predator finally relaxing in his own den. I watched him as he typed furiously, reviewing a hostile takeover of a Silicon Valley tech firm. "They are using a decentralized algorithmic defense," I murmured absent-mindedly, glancing at the shifting data on his screen. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "If you flood their secondary liquidity pool, their automated failsafes will trigger a massive sell-off. You can buy them out at a 40% discount by tomorrow morning." The typing stopped. The silence in the office was deafening. I froze, my blood turning to ice water. Stupid. So incredibly stupid. I was supposed to be a struggling architectural drafter, not a Wall Street quantitative analyst. Harrison turned in his chair slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. His silver eyes roamed over my face, stripping away the terrified Omega facade, staring directly at the ruthless monster hiding underneath. A slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile spread across his lips. "Is that right?" Harrison purred, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't interrogate me. He didn't demand to know how I understood high-frequency trading algorithms. He simply stood up and picked up his suit jacket. "I have a board meeting," Harrison announced casually. Walking toward the door, he paused, his hand on the glass handle, and looked back at me. His eyes darted to his unlocked primary terminal. "My system is logged in, Ethan. The master override password is Leo's birth date. Try not to get too bored while I am gone." He left, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He knows. The thought screamed in my mind. Or, at the very least, he suspected. Why else would he hand me the keys to his kingdom? It was a test or a trap. But I couldn't afford to hesitate. The malware was already in my pocket. I moved to his desk, my fingers flying across his keyboard. Using his unmonitored master access, I seamlessly integrated my digital parasites into the Kincaid global mainframe. The web was complete. The invisible noose was securely fastened around Richard Kincaid's neck. All I had to do was pull it. That night, back at the penthouse, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its wake. I walked out of the master suite, intending to get a glass of water. I stopped at the edge of the living room. The lights were dimmed. Harrison was sitting on the floor, still wearing his expensive suit pants and a white dress shirt. He was painstakingly piecing together a complex, 1,000-piece Lego spaceship. Leo was fast asleep, his small head resting heavily on Harrison's broad chest, drooling slightly onto the expensive fabric. Harrison looked up, catching my eye in the semi-darkness. His expression was infinitely tender as he adjusted a blanket over our son's shoulders. I stood paralyzed in the shadows. For 5 years, I had viewed the Kincaid name as a disease, a monolith of cruelty that needed to be eradicated. But looking at Harrison now, a ruthless apex predator who had happily turned himself into a mattress for a 5-year-old boyish sharp, undeniable pain pierced my chest. I had woven the perfect trap to burn this empire to the ground. But for the very first time, I was terrified of striking the match. 2 weeks. That was all it took for a titan to begin cracking. The microfrequency emitter I had planted under Richard Kincaid's desk was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It was entirely invisible, but its effects were devastatingly apparent. Whispers rippled through the Wall Street headquarters. The chairman was erratic, suffering from extreme insomnia, and firing executives over imagined conspiracies. His pheromones, once a heavy, oppressive blanket of authority, now smelled like burnt copper and paranoia. My digital parasites had simultaneously burrowed deep into the Kincaid mainframe every night. Under the guise of sleeping in the guest suite, I monitored the high-frequency trading bots. They were perfectly positioned, waiting for my signal to execute a massive short sell that would liquidate 30% of Richard's core assets. The trap was fully armed. I was just waiting for the right moment to step back and watch the explosion. Instead, the explosion came to me. Emergency board meeting, Harrison announced one Thursday morning, stepping into the kitchen of the penthouse. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit, looking effortlessly lethal. My father called it. He is demanding you be there. My stomach performed a sickening drop, but I kept my expression flawlessly blank. Pouring a cup of coffee, me. Why would the board care about a struggling architect? We are about to find out, Harrison replied, his silver eyes locking onto mine. There was no warmth in them today, only the sharp, calculating gleam of a predator assessing the wind. An hour later, we stepped into the glass-walled boardroom on the 80th floor. The atmosphere was incredibly hostile. A dozen senior board members sat around the massive mahogany table, their faces grim. At the head of the table stood Richard Kincaid. He looked terrible and deep. Purple bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he leaned against the table, but the sheer, venomous hatred radiating from him was palpable. Take a seat, Harrison, Richard rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. And tell your little Omega pet to stand against the wall, where criminals belong. Harrison didn't sit. He stopped dead in his tracks, the air around him instantly dropping 10 degrees. The scent of ozone and sharp cedar flooded the room, heavy and suffocating, making several beta board members visibly flinch. You will address my partner with respect, father, Harrison warned a low, vibrating growl echoing in his chest. Respect, Richard barked a manic laugh, slamming a thick, leather-bound folder onto the glass table. He is a parasite, a corporate spy. You brought a viper into this company because you couldn't keep your biological urges in check. Richard violently flipped the folder open. I had my private security sweep the network. Someone has been siphoning classified data. Someone has been setting up decentralized algorithmic shorts against my personal portfolios. Richard pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. And the IP address traces straight back to your penthouse, Harrison, to him. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I kept my face utterly passive, slipping my hands into the pockets of my tailored trousers. Under the fabric, my thumb brushed the screen of my encrypted smartphone. That is not all, Richard sneered, his eyes wild with sleep-deprived triumph. I filed an emergency injunction this morning with the New York Supreme Court. I am claiming full custody of Leo. I have the evidence right here to prove that Ethan Hayes is a fraudulent, manipulative thief who is entirely unfit to raise a Kincaid heir. Custody. The word hit me like a physical blow. The cold, calculating ice in my veins instantly turned into boiling acid. He was going after my son. Fine, I thought, a ruthless, terrifying calm washing over me. You want a war? I will give you a slaughter. Without breaking eye contact with Richard, I pressed my thumb down on my phone screen through the fabric of my pocket, swiping right. Execution confirmed. In exactly 30 seconds, the bots would flood the market. Richard's assets were about to be turned to dust. It is over, Ethan, Richard snarled, looking at me with pure disgust. You thought you could outsmart a Kincaid. You are nothing. He turned to Harrison. Have security drag him out of here. And call the police. I braced myself. This was it. The moment of truth. My cover was blown. I waited for Harrison to turn around, to look at me with the absolute, freezing betrayal I had expected for 5 years. I waited for the apex alpha to bare his fangs and tear me apart for using him, for using his network, for daring to steal from his empire. Harrison stood perfectly still. He slowly turned his head to look at the folder on the table. Then, he looked at his father. Harrison didn't look angry. He looked entirely, terrifyingly bored. He reached inside the tailored jacket of his suit. The board members held their breath. I watched in stunned silence as Harrison casually pulled out a sleek, black Kimber 1911 pistol. A deafening smash echoed through the room as Harrison slammed the heavy firearm down onto the pristine glass of the boardroom table. The crack echoed off the walls, making Richard jump back, his eyes wide with sudden terror. The silence in the room was absolute. Nobody breathed. The pheromones rolling off Harrison were no longer just warning signals. They were a biological death threat, smelling of burning ash and pure, unrestrained violence. "Harrison, what the hell are you doing?" Richard stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. "I am trying to understand," Harrison murmured, his voice deadly quiet. "Why you are raising your voice at my husband over some pocket change?" Richard stared at him bewildered. "Pocket change? He is shorting 30% of our core assets. He is committing corporate sabotage." "So what?" Harrison tilted his head, his silver eyes devoid of any mercy. "If my Omega wants to play with the stock market, he can play with the stock market. Kincaid money exists for his amusement. If he wants to burn your portfolios to the ground to keep himself entertained, I will personally hand him the matches." My breath caught in my throat, my mind, usually operating at 1,000 calculations a second, completely flatlined. Harrison stepped forward, his hand resting casually near the grip of the pistol on the table. He leaned toward his father, looking like the devil incarnate. "You can call him a thief. You can call him a spy," Harrison whispered, every syllable dripping with lethal intent. "But you tried to take my son. You threatened to take a child away from his Omega mother. That is an offense I do not forgive." Behind Richard, the massive flat-screen monitors displaying the global market tickers suddenly flashed red. The numbers on Richard's personal holdings began to plummet in real time. A 10% drop. Then 20. The bots were executing flawlessly. Richard turned to look at the screens, a strangled gasp escaping his throat as he watched his financial empire evaporate into the digital ether. He clutched his chest, swaying on his feet. Harrison didn't even glance at the crashing stocks. He turned around, his intense, burning silver eyes locking onto mine across the room. There was no anger in his gaze. There was only a dark, twisted pride, and a possessive hunger that made my knees genuinely weak. I stood paralyzed against the wall. I had spent 5 years meticulously weaving a web to destroy a monster. But as I looked at Harrison, I realized the horrifying truth. I hadn't trapped the monster. The monster had willingly walked into my web, handed me the knife, and dared the rest of the world to try and take it from me. My entire script was completely, irreversibly derailed. The elevator ride down from the 81st floor to Harrison's private suite was the longest 2 minutes of my life. The silence inside the mahogany and brass cage was not peaceful. It was highly pressurized. Harrison stood beside me, his hands casually shoved into his trouser pockets, staring straight ahead at the brass doors. The terrifying, unrestrained alpha pheromones he had unleashed in the boardroom had retracted, coiling tightly beneath his skin. He smelled like ozone before a massive thunderstorm calmed deadly and inevitable. I stood rigidly in the corner, staring at the floor indicator. My mind was scrambling, trying to reassemble the shattered pieces of my master plan. He knew. He let me do it. Why? When the doors chimed open on the 78th floor, Harrison stepped out, expecting me to follow. We walked down the hushed, plushly carpeted hallway and entered his secondary office, a massive, private sanctuary of dark leather rare scotch and sweeping views of the Hudson River. Harrison walked over to the heavy oak door and locked it with a sharp, definitive click. Then, he turned to face me. He didn't yell. He didn't demand explanations. He simply walked over to his desk, picked up a sleek black tablet, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table between us. The microfrequency emitter was a nice touch, Harrison stated calmly, unbuttoning his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. "I had my security chief find it 3 days ago under my father's desk. We replaced your adhesive with a stronger one so it wouldn't fall off." I stared at him, my throat completely dry. You knew. "I knew the moment you accidentally noticed the Silicon Valley algorithmic defense on my monitors," Harrison said, loosening his tie, his silver eyes fixed on me, stripping away the last remnants of my innocent Omega facade. "You are brilliant, Ethan, truly. Your code is elegant, aggressive, and utterly ruthless. Watching you dismantle my father's portfolios over the last 2 weeks has been the most entertaining thing I have experienced in a decade. He took a step toward me. I instinctively took a step back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "Why didn't you stop me?" I whispered, genuine confusion cutting through my panic. "I was stealing from your family. I was burning your inheritance." "My inheritance?" Harrison let out a dark, amused chuckle. "My father's a parasite, Ethan. He built this empire on the backs of others, and he tried to mold me into a monster just like him. I have wanted to excise him from this company for years, but the board was too loyal to his legacy." Harrison took another step, backing me up until my legs hit the edge of the leather sofa. "Then," Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating purr, "you walked into that gala. You brought my son back to me, and you handed me the perfect weapon. You became the Trojan horse. You did the dirty work. You took the risk, and you gave me the plausible deniability I needed to finally oust him. I was a pawn, I realized, the bitter taste of defeat flooding my mouth. You used me." "No, Ethan," Harrison corrected sharply, closing the distance between us. "You used me. You used my home, my network, my resources. I just facilitated your vengeance. Because I knew, if I gave you everything you needed to destroy my father, you would have no reason to ever leave." He was standing inches from me now. The heat radiating from his large frame was intense. "But there is one thing I don't understand," Harrison murmured, reaching out. I stiffened as his large hand brushed against the lapel of my jacket. His fingers trailed down, slipping into the inner pocket. He pulled out the small, amber bottle of military-grade suppressants. My breath hitched. Harrison looked at the bottle, his expression darkening instantly. The playful, dangerous amusement vanished, replaced by genuine, terrifying alpha fury. "You have been taking these," Harrison growled, his voice vibrating in my chest, "every day since you arrived." "I need them," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. "To keep my head clear." "You took them to block me out," Harrison corrected, his grip on the bottle tightening until his knuckles turned white. "You pumped yourself full of chemical ash so you wouldn't feel the bond. So you wouldn't feel me." Before I could protest, Harrison hurled the bottle against the far wall. The glass shattered violently, scattering the heavy white pills across the hardwood floor. "Harrison," I gasped, a spike of genuine fear piercing my chest. "No more acting, Ethan," Harrison demanded, stepping into my space, trapping me between his heavy body and the sofa. "The game is over. The board is clear. There are no more lies between us." He didn't touch me, but he didn't need to. Without the chemical barrier of the suppressants, Harrison fully released his pheromones. It was an overwhelming, biological tidal wave. The scent of sharp cedarwood ozone and burning ash slammed into my senses. It wasn't a threat. It was a pure, unadulterated claim. It was an alpha demanding absolute submission from his chosen mate. My body, deprived of its chemical shield, reacted violently. A heavy, liquid heat pooled in my lower stomach. My knees completely gave out. I collapsed backward onto the leather sofa, a soft, involuntary gasp escaping my lips. The room began to spin, the edges of my vision blurring with a sudden, intense fever. "Look at you," Harrison whispered, leaning over me, his hands gripping the back of the sofa on either side of my head. His silver eyes were entirely blown, the pupils consuming the iris. "You are fighting it so hard. You hate the fact that your body wants me just as much as your brilliant, twisted mind does." "Stop," I choked out, trying to turn my head away, but the scent was everywhere. It was in my lungs, in my blood. The suppression wall I had maintained for 5 years was crumbling under the sheer force of his presence. "I won't stop," Harrison rasped, his nose grazing the sensitive skin right over my scent gland. I shuddered violently. "You played a dangerous game, little spy. You walked into the wolf's den, stole his secrets, and burned his kingdom, and now..." Harrison's hand slid up to cup my jaw, forcing me to look at him. The hunger in his eyes was absolute terrifying, and undeniably devoted. "Now, it is time to pay the toll." The final barrier snapped. The preheat hit me like a freight train, crashing over me with a desperate, agonizing need. I didn't push him away. With a frustrated, desperate sob, I reached up, tangled my hands in his immaculate hair, and pulled him down. The storm had finally broken. I woke up to the sensation of heavy, possessive warmth. The penthouse master suite was dimly lit, bathed in the soft, gray light of early morning filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My body felt entirely disconnected from my brain, aching, exhausted, and yet vibrating with a profound, terrifying sense of peace. I shifted slightly against the silk sheets, and a sharp prick of pain flared at the junction of my neck and shoulder. I inhaled sharply, reaching up. My trembling fingers brushed against the raw, swollen skin right over my scent gland. The bite, the claim. It wasn't just a physical mark, it was a biological anchor. The scent in the room was overwhelming, a thick, intoxicating blend of Harrison's sharp cedarwood and burning ash, now irreversibly tangled with the sweet, heavy scent of my crushed lavender. It was the scent of absolute surrender. Does it hurt? The voice was a low, gravelly rumble against my ear. I turned my head on the pillow. Harrison was awake, lying on his side, watching me. He was completely stripped of his bespoke suits, his calculating glares, and his CEO armor. His silver eyes were soft, tracing the contours of my face with a reverence that made my chest tighten. "A little," I whispered, my voice incredibly hoarse. Harrison shifted closer, wrapping a heavy arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his bare chest. He pressed his lips gently against the bruised skin near the bite mark, exhaling a calming, soothing pheromone that instantly eased the ache. We lay there in silence. There were no more lies to spin, no more codes to write, and no more traps to set. The chessboard had been flipped, and we were the only two left in the wreckage. "You let me destroy your family's empire," I said quietly, staring at the expanse of his chest. The reality of what had happened in the boardroom yesterday was finally settling in. "You handed me the keys, watched me light the match, and then you pointed a gun at your own father to protect me." "I would have pulled the trigger too," Harrison murmured, his tone frighteningly casual. I looked up at him, searching his face. "Why, Harrison? I came here to ruin you. I used your son as bait. I was the enemy." Harrison reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. His fingers lingered on my cheek. "You were never the enemy, Ethan. You were a ghost." He let out a slow, heavy breath, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising to meet my eyes again. "For 5 years, I looked for you," Harrison confessed, the raw vulnerability in his voice piercing straight through my heart. "I hired the best private investigators in the world. I tracked credit cards, scoured security footage, bought out data brokers. But you vanished. You took the only light I had ever found and disappeared into the dark. It drove me insane." His grip on my waist tightened, a flare of retrospective panic leaking into his scent. "When I saw Leo at that gala," Harrison continued, "when I smelled you, I realized I had been given a second chance. But I also knew who you were. I knew you were brilliant, ruthless, and that you hated the Kincaid name for what you thought I did to you." "So, you knew I was planning a hostile takeover?" I asked, bewildered. "I knew the moment you accidentally spilled your coffee on my laptop the second night you were here and tried to clone my hard drive." Harrison chuckled softly, a dark, amused sound. "I disabled the firewalls for you. When you planted the emitter under my father's desk, I paid the security guards to look the other way." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of his manipulation. "You orchestrated your own downfall." "I orchestrated his downfall," Harrison corrected, his silver eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light. "My father was a tyrant who needed to be excised. But more importantly, I needed a cage for you." He cupped my jaw, forcing me to look directly into the depths of his obsession. "I knew that if I confronted you, if I tried to force you to stay with money or power, you would run again," Harrison whispered fiercely. "But if I gave you war, if I let you play the mastermind and dismantle the Kincaid legacy brick by brick, you would stay. You would be so consumed by your revenge that you wouldn't realize I was locking the doors behind you until it was too late." I stopped breathing, the sheer, terrifying magnitude of his devotion washed over me. He hadn't just tolerated my betrayal, he had nurtured it. He had willingly turned himself into the villain of my story, just so he could have a role in it. The last remnants of my pride, the stubborn walls I had built to protect myself, crumbled entirely. It wasn't a defeat. It was an awakening. I had spent 5 years trying to outsmart a monster, only to realize the monster didn't want to eat me. He wanted to build me a throne. I reached up, threading my fingers through his dark, immaculate hair. I pulled his face down, pressing my lips to his in a slow, deep kiss. It wasn't frantic or desperate like the night before. It was an acceptance. "You are completely out of your mind, Harrison Kincaid." I breathed against his lips. "I am yours," Harrison replied, a satisfied, predatory smile curving his mouth. "And you are mine, finally." Before I could respond, the heavy oak door of the bedroom suddenly creaked open. Harrison and I both froze. "Papa," a small voice called out in the dim light. Leo padded into the room, dragging his stuffed wolf by the tail, his superhero pajamas rumpled from sleep. He stopped at the foot of the massive bed, rubbing his mismatched eyes. Harrison quickly pulled the silk sheet higher over my shoulders, clearing his throat. "Good morning, Leo." Leo blinked, sniffing the air with a highly exaggerated wrinkle of his nose. He looked around the room, utterly unimpressed by the heavy, post-claiming atmosphere. "Why does it smell like burnt wood and really sweet strawberry syrup in here?" Leo complained, attempting to climb up onto the high mattress. "It smells weird. I want pancakes." The intense, emotionally charged tension in the room instantly popped like a soap bubble. I looked at Harrison, who was staring at our 5-year-old son with a mixture of profound adoration and slight exasperation. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. I couldn't stop it. I buried my face in Harrison's bare shoulder, laughing until my sides ached. Harrison let out a deep, booming laugh as well, easily reaching down to scoop Leo up and deposit him squarely between us on the bed. "Pancakes it is, little wolf," Harrison declared, kissing the top of Leo's messy head, his arm still securely wrapped around my waist. I looked at the two of them, the ruthless billionaire and the chaotic 5-year-old. The hatred was gone. The game was over. And for the very first time in my life, I felt entirely, unconditionally safe. 6 months later, the morning air in the Hamptons tasted of sea salt, crisp autumn leaves, an absolute victory. I sat on the expansive wraparound porch of the Kincaid coastal estate, my bare feet tucked beneath me on the plush outdoor sofa. I was wearing one of Harrison's oversized, white button-down shirts. It swallowed my frame entirely, but I wore it like armor. It smelled heavily of him, that intoxicating blend of sharp cedarwood and ozone, now permanently interwoven with the sweet, calm scent of my lavender. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, relishing the heat, before tapping the screen of the sleek, custom-built tablet resting on my lap. The Bloomberg terminal interface glowed back at me. Kincaid Global's stock was up another 4% this quarter. Ever since Richard Kincaid's highly publicized and brutally orchestrated early retirement, the market had responded to Harrison's undisputed reign with voracious enthusiasm. But I wasn't looking at Kincaid Global. My eyes were tracking the shifting algorithmic patterns of Vanguard Media, a massive Silicon Valley conglomerate that had recently made the fatal mistake of insulting Harrison during a closed-door negotiation. "Papa, look!" The bright, chaotic shout shattered the quiet morning. I looked up from the tablet, a genuine smile breaking across my face. Down in the sprawling apple orchard that bordered the property, Harrison Kincaid, the ruthless, blood-chilling terror of Wall Street, was currently wearing a casual cashmere sweater and acting as a human steed. Leo was sitting squarely on his broad shoulders, his tiny hands reaching up into the high branches of an old apple tree. "I got the red one," Leo cheered, successfully plucking a massive, perfectly ripe apple from the branch. "Excellent tactical acquisition, little wolf," Harrison praised, his deep voice carrying over the morning breeze. He reached up, holding Leo securely by the waist as he swung the boy down from his shoulders and onto the manicured grass. I watched them jog up the slight hill toward the porch. The sunlight caught Harrison's dark hair and the striking silver of his eyes. My pulse gave a familiar, biological flutter. The bite mark on my neck, now fully healed into a neat, permanent silver scar over my scent gland, throbbed with a phantom heat. We were bound completely, irreversibly, and fundamentally. Leo reached the porch first, his boots thudding against the wooden deck. He held the apple up to me like a hard-won trophy, his mismatched eyes shining with triumph. "Look what I got. Can Chef make a pie? A really big pie?" "I am sure he can, buddy," I laughed, reaching out to ruffle his messy curls. "Go take it to the kitchen and ask him nicely. No demanding." "Okay," Leo spun around on his heel and darted into the house, a tiny hurricane of boundless energy. Harrison walked up the steps at a much slower, deliberate pace. He didn't sit in the empty chair beside me. Instead, he stepped right into my space, boxing my legs in on the sofa. He leaned down, placing a hand on the backrest behind my head, and pressed a slow, devastatingly deep kiss to my lips. His morning scent enveloped me, making the omega instincts deep in my chest purr in absolute contentment. I reached up, threading my fingers into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him just a fraction closer. When he finally pulled back, he was smiling that dark, predatory smirk that meant he was exactly where he wanted to be. "Good morning, husband," Harrison murmured, his voice a low rumble against my skin. "Good morning," I replied, breathless. Harrison's silver eyes flicked down to the tablet resting on my lap. He saw the red and green tickers, the aggressive short-selling algorithms I had queued up, and the target profile of Vanguard Media. Still plotting in the shadows, my brilliant mastermind, Harrison purred, a dark amusement lighting up his features. He traced a finger along my jawline. "I thought we came to the Hamptons to relax." "We did," I said innocently, leaning into his touch. But Vanguard's CEO made a critical error in their secondary liquidity pool yesterday afternoon. Their automated failsafes are overleveraged. Harrison's eyes darkened, the alpha predator instantly recognizing the scent of blood in the water. He didn't tell me to put the work away. He didn't ask me to be a soft, domesticated Omega. He looked at me with a profound, terrifying pride. "Is that so?" Harrison asked, leaning closer to inspect the screen. "A hostile takeover. Hostile takes too long. It gives their board time to rally," I countered, my mind slipping effortlessly back into the cold, calculating rhythm of the game. "I have set up a dozen decentralized proxy accounts. If we bleed their secondary liquidity by triggering a localized panic sell-off at the opening bell on Monday, their stock will plummet by 40% in 3 hours." I looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "You can step in as the White Knight and buy the controlling shares for pennies on the dollar before they even realize you slit their throat." Harrison stared at me for a long, quiet moment. The sheer magnitude of his devotion and his shared ruthlessness radiated from him in waves. He didn't want to tame the monster he had found in me. He wanted to give me the world so I could burn it down for my own amusement. "You," Harrison whispered fiercely, crushing his lips to mine again, "are the most dangerous creature I have ever met." "I learned from the best," I murmured against his mouth. Harrison chuckled, pulling back to kiss my forehead. "Execute the order on Monday. Let's buy Vanguard and give it to Leo as a sandbox." I laughed, a bright, unburdened sound that echoed across the porch. I leaned my head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. I looked out over the sprawling lawn, toward the private beach and the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean. 5 years ago, I had run into the darkness, terrified of the monster hiding in the Kincaid Tower. I had spent half a decade sharpening my claws, building a perfect trap to destroy him, only to discover that the trap was mutual. We were not a fairy tale. We were not a story of gentle romance and soft compromises. We were two wild street wolves, an undisputed apex alpha and a brilliantly ruthless omega, who had collided in a storm of betrayal and obsession. We had torn down an empire just to build a new one on its ashes. And as Harrison's heavy, protective arm wrapped securely around my waist, anchoring me to him, I knew one thing for certain. The game was far from over. But this time, we were playing on the same side. And heaven help anyone who dared to stand in our way.